let's say the levy were not to pass, you still would have the 1.7 mil for until 2019, right? Okay, so you wouldn't lose that immediately. So would you lose you said your budget would go down 50%. Would you lose all state funding? I don't understand.
No, we would lose it when the.
Can we get you over there so it'll be part of the discussion?
What if that levy were to be renewed at that level?
Then the funding would remain in place at that point.
Okay, and then what would be the consequence of that? I mean, I've seen state funding. I called the auditor's office. They gave me the allocation. It's gone up. It's gone down. It seems to be, it depends what the General Assembly sets it at. So what would be the long-term future of the library if your revenue, if you kept the 1.7 mil, and then with state fund, but they're not cutting by 50% a year, obviously.
No, they're not, but it has been a continuous decline. And like we said in there,
But there was a couple of years where it went up, didn't it?
No.
It's gone down every single year?
So in 2009, it was actually 2.2% of the general revenue fund of the state.
Okay.
And in that year, they cut it to 1.7%. And they actually changed it from the local, we were part of the local libraries and government fund.
Right.
And they changed it and created the PLF fund. So since 2009, it has dropped from 2.22% to 1. Actually, it was dropped to 1.66.
So what are your revenue figures gone down?
From ours, from back
for
then?
2009.
I don't actually have that information right now.
Okay.
I'd be happy to provide that to you if you.
How much do you know? How much it would go down in future years, the next 5 years? Or you
From
just
the
have
state
no idea?
funding?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's in the biennium budget for the state, so, we know what the current
Right.
is and what the proposed is, but
So
it changes every 2
Let's say we
years.
kept the status quo, 1.7 mils. Let's say it got renewed for another 8 years. Then what would be the consequence of that?
Well, I think you can picture, like I said, we've had that same funding for the
Sure.
last 7 years.
Right.
So, I don't know that anybody has a household budget that has stayed,
Sure.
exactly the same, or price has gone down on the things that you're trying to buy or to
Right.
the
Now
services
with
you're trying to
2.2,
get.
with 2.2, you would go up $7. Was it $3 million more a year in revenue? Did I get that right?
Approximately, yes.
About $3 million. Okay. So will most of that go to renovations? That's what it sounds like. To building improvements?
The majority of it will go to current expenses,
Okay.
so maintaining the library is.
Majority, how much, what
The
percentage?
levy is for current expenses.
The
Pardon?
is for
The
current.
levy is for current expenses.
Right.
But that 1.7 mils covers just enough of that right now, right? Then why 3 million? Why not just ask for 1 million more or 2 million more? Why ask for 3 million more a year?
So it's a combination of, like I said, the prices on things going up, just the general cost of doing
So-
business increasing,
Yeah.
as well as the renovations to the buildings, which haven't, the most recent ones have been 15 years ago.
So-
Right. So what is the 2.2 going to raise every year? Be clear on that?
Sorry. So our current revenue this year from the levy has been about $7.8 million.
Okay.
Going from a 1.7 mil levy to a 2.2 mil levy gets us to about 11 million. So it's
Okay.
approximately a $3 million increase annually.
And how much of that goes towards just day-to-day expenses?
Well, all of it would go towards day-to-day expenses.
The entire, so the way levies are,
So it costs you right now nearly $8 million a year to run the library?
it's actually more than that. It's our
That's half.
budget.
With the state of Ohio,
Yeah,
it
our-
gives you some money, right? I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
forgot about
What's your budget
that.
every year again? It's like 15 million.
Approximately 50.
So were you going to get money to renovate buildings? There's been some talk that you folks are considering either remodeling or rebuilding the main library. Is there anything to that talk? Is that just a rumor?
Well, I mean, all of our spaces need to be considered in this plan. I mean, we were talking in there about the most recent renovations we've done are 15 years old. And when you consider how information gathering and use and access has changed in that amount of time, the way people use their libraries has changed considerably.
Is
So,
the trend away from buildings?
I'm not sure.
Permanent building. You talked about the example in Jackson, which is a lesser type of structure and more mobile, more flexible, right?
I see what you're saying. Mhm.
Right. Is that the trend?
I think mobile and flexible and adaptable are the trend, yes.
Okay.
Partially because I can tell you the difference in the way people access information today from when our libraries were built, but I can't necessarily predict that into the future. So I want a building that is going to be adaptable and flexible, that we can use for today's customers and that can be of value to this community for decades to come.
Does the library have a capital plan for how much all these improvements will cost and what improvements you plan? Have you come up with a capital plan yet?
We don't have a single document that does all of that. We're looking at, like I said, at changing things to adapt the buildings that were built for an old style of use.
I understand.
To the current style of use and for flexible buildings for the
Okay,
future.
but you have not assessed that yet. That's what that sounds like. Like no one's assessed how much it would cost to do this and what scope of work. You have not determined that yet?
We have not determined that yet.
Okay. And then are your expenses going to go up $3 million in a year from one year to what's going to, are you going to have a surplus and save it until inflation? What's going to happen to the $3 million?
Is that the money that you're thinking of
increase, that's
using
additional.
for capital rehab or building new? Is that where that $3 million is going to play in?
Right, that's a significant piece of it. So there's two significant factors here. One is that we've, basically had stable or declining funding for 7 years, right? So there's a certain amount of just normal increase in prices and the cost of doing business that needs to be covered by that. And then the other is this, the renovating of these spaces, which are community assets that we want to make sure are valuable not only now but into the future for those communities.
But again, you've not determined the cost of that, nor what scope of work you want to do yet. That's what my understanding. Am I correct on that?
I don't have the whole scope of work to
So are you in the process of auditing your facilities? Now, where are we on the new Jackson facility?
So we're still in the planning and design phase. We're hoping to break ground before the end of the year. I will tell you, just to be very clear and on the record here, the new Jackson building is not contingent on this levy. We're going forward with that. The board has, put their...
Like you made that clear.
Yes, has made that clear that we are going forward with that building, and it will happen regardless of the outcome of this election.
So will that building be an example of the kind of building or restructuring of your buildings that Stark Countyans can look to as to what you might be doing with other buildings within your complex?
Very much so. And, I think it does a couple things. It shows those ideas about the flexibility and the adaptability that I was talking about, as well as the convenience. It takes advantage of the things that we've learned in that temporary location at the Jackson storefront, which has been our idea incubator, and it, puts them into a larger building. And we have a video actually on our website that folks could look at if they wanted to. It's starklibrary.org/Jackson that really details how those different aspects of the new building design address the needs and the desires of the way people are using their library today,
Now,
and how it's going to be flexible for into the future.
Is the Jackson storefront going away?
When we move into the new library building.
Is there a timetable as to when the new building will be built?
So we're hoping to break ground before the end of the year, and the architects have told me it should take 12 to 18 months.
12 to 18 months.
And
For construction?
And a lot of that is weather dependent.
Okay,
So-
but now you've been through that experience and you've gained some important knowledge
I think that's-
about what storefront. Could, going forward, you be looking at more storefront type operations in the system?
We could be considering that, but I think the key piece here is to emphasize that what we want to do is to be where the customers are and to be where the need is in the community. We can do that in a variety of different ways, but I think that smaller, more mobile, flexible kind of concept is one way where we could do that throughout the community. So, the bookmobiles are a great example, right? You don't have to come to the library, we'll bring the library to you. So, how do we take that sort of model of easy access, convenience, being in the space where people are, and make it even more easy to use your library. I mean, we've done community surveys where we've asked folks, what's the number one reason why you use the library? And they say convenience. And then we ask folks who don't use the library, what's the number one thing we could do to make you use your library more? Make it more convenient. Okay, so this is a recurring theme that we're hearing throughout the community.
How did you, please remind me, how did you come up with, we need a 2.2 mil levy and we need $3 million more? How did you reach that number that you felt that was appropriate request of the voters?
So, like I said, we looked at, what we have been able to do with the 1.7.
Okay.
And then not only the increases in the cost of doing business, but the needs that we think we're going to have going forward. And that is the number that we came up with for.
Okay, so did you make an estimate? We're going to spend, in year number one, we're going to spend this much of the $3 million increase on A, B, and C. Is there such an estimate available?
I don't know that we have something that is that specific, but obviously our budget documents would reflect that when we're.
So it sounds like the first couple of years you'd have a surplus, right? Like you would reserve some money for inflation down the road. Is that correct?
I think
because your costs aren't going to go up $3 million in 1 year, right?
No, but I think that the first several years would be about this renovating the spaces and using that money to make sure that those spaces are viable for our community.
Right, and I'm guessing to offset if there's any state decrease in funding to offset that, but you don't know what those would be.
We don't know what those would be.
And then inflation, what kind of inflation are you facing? Like raise, like 2% a year, 3% a year? Or?
It's just the general inflation rate across the country. So yes, roughly the 2%.
So it sounds like much of the $3 million, but you don't, would go for physical improvements or capital improvements, and then as inflation were to pick up, you would use the additional revenue to cover that, as you complete these projects. Is that my understanding correct?
Right. It's that, we do have, there's demand for library materials that we currently are, trying to meet. We have folks literally waiting in line, to get the books that they want, to get the ebooks and downloadables that they want.
How would you spend money so they don't wait in line as much?
So we would invest more money in actual, resources that folks can use.
Like what?
Like more copies of things, more access to things, to the books and the materials that they want.
Following up on Commissioner
Besides having more
Creighton's.
copies, what are other ways of easier access?
Just ways for people to access the information. So Jean touched on the different access points, such as the vending machine type situations, the lockers, just more accessible, more convenient methods for
really boosting that convenience factor is huge.
Okay, following up on Commissioner Creighton's point about accountability, continuing, and of course, the accountability on her plan is every year you have to justify to the taxpayers. What is the library going to put in place for taxpayers since it is a continuing levy, so there is accountability?
Right. Well, I think the key to that is like I said, that I feel like the voters are speaking with their actions and their use of the library, and so we have to be responsive to that. Use is profit for us. If you consider, in the commercial world, what is profit? You want to make as much money as possible. For us, it's use. So if we have library resources or library buildings that are not being used, then we simply are not successful as an organization. So we need to make sure that we are being responsive to those voters and to the communities that we serve, so they continue to use us and we continue to be, profitable in that sense.
Do you put out an annual report, the annual financial report?
We do put out an annual report, and our board of directors is very responsive to community input and concerns, and they're available. All of our records and meetings are, open to the public, and we are always looking for public input on ways we can be doing better. I always tell people if they call me with a suggestion, I say, I know that folks call because they care about an organization.
Right, yeah. For instance, I sent a suggestion in on the charitable organization accountability.
Right.
And you got back to me, and you're considering that. But that's probably a pretty regular thing.
It is. One of the features that we have right now is if you need something when we don't have, we will find a way to get it for you. We will either borrow it from one of our partner libraries throughout the state, or we'll buy it if we can't find it from one of them. So we are trying to be as responsive as possible to the people who use and pay for our services.
I mean, I do use the library, but I love the online aspect of it. What are your plans going forward in expanding the online factor? It's kind of, and this is not the best expression, but a conflict of interest situation in terms of you got the buildings, they need to be used, the justification, and yet a lot of us are really wedded to doing things online, especially in the information realm.
Sure.
And so can you address that just briefly?
Well, I too like the online resources, and I always tell people that's the best way to use the library at home, on your couch, in your pajamas. I mean, talk
Right.
about ease of access, right? We can't
Right.
get any more direct than that.
Right.
But our buildings are hubs for the communities that they're in. These are the places where people come to have meetings, or to learn, or to have tutoring, or to express ideas. I mean, we really function as community hubs, and the value is there in those buildings, and it needs to be stewarded in a way that
So
is
it's kind of a balancing act, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, one thing about the online, apparently this is a licensing problem, that some online features, you have to actually go into the library to access them. Is that what it is? Or is just to get draw traffic into the library?
Well, we make everything available from home if it's possible to do that. So
From a
there are-
licensing
There
standpoint?
are some that are licensed for only specific use in the
Okay,
library.
I get it.
But if we can, we want you to be able to use it wherever you are.
Okay, thank you.
I think I would just like, I'm on the board of
Okay,
trustees.
and from
I'm Sally Arfremont.
Mark, yes.
I just want to emphasize what Gina's been saying about the fiscal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
The board every month goes over the numbers, the figures, the use of the library, everything that you would care about, we go over. We question Board Chris.
Very active board, you'd say?
It is a very interested board and a very concerned board about our stewardship of the public's money. And when he asked about specific questions, one reason we can't answer them in all specifics, we don't have the money yet.
Right.
When we have it, we have a lot of thoughts about what needs to be done. We know what needs to be done. And, if we could, we'd go for more, but we can't, because we want to be fiscally responsible.
Okay.
And that is the fairest amount. So I just want you and the public to know that this was not just a number pulled down from above. It was a very carefully thought out number. We need it in order to do for the community what we think the community wants us to do. We learned that a lot from Jackson. The people care about their libraries.
Right.
They want them to be available, and they want them to do everything. So I just want to be sure that you understand that the board I'm just one of 7, but we really do, I think, study the budget, and I think we're understanding of what we're asking for.
Well, thanks for making that point, because that refreshed my memory that I wanted to ask the question about, has any survey been done of the users of the library about plans going forward, even though you don't have the money yet? I mean, has there been some discussion, if we put on a new levy with additional money, would you support it? Is there any kind of...
You can respond to that.
Yes, we've done polling, we've done online surveys, we've done in-depth interviews with different community leaders, and then polling of likely voters to try to gauge people's interest in this and to understand what they're looking for from the library. And in addition to that, we have over the last 3 or 4 years done annual surveys to really understand more about how people are using the library, library, what they want from their library, the things that really resonate with them, so that, I kept talking about the convenience factor. And that's, not something that we just think is a nice idea. That's what the public has told us they are interested in. And so we are really looking at how we can make those resources and those assets more available to people.
Are the results of those surveys available to the public to look
Yes.
at?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And new CEO of the library, and you've been on the job 3 days?
3 days. Today's
And
my
the
third
last
day.
name is Mary Ellen.
Mary Ellen Ikaza,
Okay. And you come from
Maryland.
Maryland? Okay. All right. Take it that there's some bio that a person like myself can get, so I don't have to stand here and run you through that. But I'd be delighted to. You want to address your history at all?
We've done some fabulous pieces. I think we
Yeah,
could send you something.
go ahead.
I think we could send you the information.
Okay, send me the
That would be
information.
great. Yeah.
And so thank you, folks, for taking time to answer our questions.
Thank you.